If David Rivers had walked on that plane in a tailored suit, shiny shoes, and a Rolex the size of a cookie, this would have been a very different story. But he didn't. He walked on in black jeans, a plain tee, and sneakers that had seen more boardrooms than most execs in cufflinks. No greeting, no swagger, just a valid ticket, seat 1A, and a plan. Carla Dawson didn't see a CEO. She saw a question mark in aisle 1. She saw a man who didn't look like he belonged, and that was enough. "Sir, economy is back that way," she offered, like a helpful librarian pointing to the wrong section. David smiled politely. "Actually, this is my seat." Carla frowned, checked nothing. Just called over Zach Morgan, backup snark delivery system in a blazer. He arrived with a grin. "Looks like someone's confused about cabins," he joked. "First class can be tricky." David handed over his boarding pass and ID. Scan, green, legit. Zach barely glanced. "Happens all the time, people trying to sneak up here like it's a game show." Carla, without a word, swiped into her tablet. Her fingers tapped fast, surgical. Then, poof, David's name disappeared from seat 1A, just like that. Must be a system error. Or maybe it was magic. Either way, David was now officially invisible. Lena Torres, the trainee flight attendant with wide eyes and a conscience, watched it all. She knew what she saw: a real ticket, a valid name, a clean scan. So she did what any rookie with a sense of justice and a phone would do. She hit record. Meanwhile, in row 3, Olivia Bennett sipped sparkling water like she was at Wimbledon. "That man just got erased," she whispered to her seatmate James Cole, who was already filming. David didn't argue. He wasn't confused. He'd planned this. He dialed his assistant. "Rachel, confirm crew IDs for Zurich, New York, flight 894. Tell legal to start the log pull. I want everything time-stamped." Rachel answered before he finished. "Already recording." Because David Rivers wasn't here for the extra legroom. He was here for the truth. And within 30 minutes, that truth would surface, with deleted names, viral videos, crew suspensions, and one quiet CEO who never raised his voice. He just raised the bar. The air in first class grew thicker, not with turbulence but with tension. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was charged. Every gesture, every glance started to feel like part of something much bigger than a seating dispute. David Rivers remained still, his eyes locked ahead, his hands resting lightly on his phone. He'd seen this pattern before. Different setting, same choreography. Suspicion without reason, authority without doubt. Carla Dawson, confident in her uniform and the weight of her position, acted swiftly. Her face didn't flinch as she dismissed David's presence. She never asked questions. She gave directives. And her eyes said what her voice didn't. "You don't belong here." Zach Morgan arrived like backup in a scene already spiraling. His energy wasn't investigative. It was performative. He smirked, made a quip about economy class, and played his part without hesitation. No one asked to see the boarding pass again. No one verified the ID. Instead, the system on Carla's tablet refreshed, and David Rivers disappeared from the digital seat map. Error, they claimed. But Lena Torres knew better. She'd seen the scan herself. Clean, green, unquestionable. She had barely finished her onboarding as a flight attendant, yet she understood immediately what was unfolding in front of her. So she did the only thing she could. She pressed record. Farther down the aisle, Olivia Bennett raised her phone camera too. Not to intervene, but to witness. Next to her, James Cole uploaded in real time. 2 phones became 5. 5 became a dozen. Captain Eric Wallace entered the cabin like a judge with the verdict already written. His voice was calm, his expression unreadable. He didn't examine the evidence. He accepted the story. Non-compliance, he called it. Protocol. But what he was really enforcing was perception. And then the Langley couple took their seats, freshly poured champagne in hand, platinum tags displayed like medals. They didn't ask why the seat was suddenly available. They didn't look at David. They simply sat, content in the silence that injustice often counts on. The silence didn't last. With every second, the cabin awakened. Murmurs became questions. Glances turned into stares. Phones rose higher. Every passenger became part of a quiet resistance. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He made a call. And with that, the aircraft was no longer boarding. It was becoming evidence. The cabin lights dimmed ever so slightly as boarding closed, but the tension remained, unacknowledged and unresolved. David Rivers sat still in seat 1A, the seat that no longer bore his name in the crew's digital records, but still held the truth. His presence wasn't loud. It was precise, intentional. He had come to observe, and now the observation was mutual. Lena Torres shifted her weight near the galley, uncertain if she was supposed to intervene, report, or simply stand there. Training told her to escalate disruptions. But this wasn't disruption. It was erasure, slow, deliberate, and quiet. So she continued recording, her phone's screen dimmed, her breaths shallow. Carla Dawson moved down the aisle with practiced grace, handing out menus with polished composure. But the room had changed. Her posture was stiffer. Her eyes moved too quickly. She could feel something slipping. Not authority, not yet, but narrative. Zach Morgan stood behind the beverage cart, making small talk with a passenger in 3C who didn't seem to care. His laughter, loud and forced, echoed briefly before it fell flat. He stole a glance at David, then looked away. Whatever confidence he had an hour ago now felt exposed, too casual to be convincing. David hadn't spoken, not once since the confrontation. Yet he had become the gravitational center of the cabin. Passengers leaned just slightly in his direction, phones tilted at careful angles, words passed between travelers like static, fragmented, whispered, but charged with meaning. Olivia Bennett adjusted her camera again. She wasn't just filming. She was archiving. James Cole was typing on his phone, rapid-fire updates and clipped observations. Every few seconds, the footage jumped across timelines and feeds, gathering speed, shaping a narrative that was no longer in the crew's control. And above all of it, quiet coordination. At Altura Air's control center, alerts began to flash. Nina Brooks had triggered internal escalation protocols. Key staff across legal, security, media, and HR were looped in before they even knew what they were responding to. The name David Rivers, when searched in the internal system, was now generating access logs across 5 departments. Yet on the plane, he hadn't moved. His silence wasn't passive. It was strategy. He had given them time. Given them room to correct, to reflect, to backtrack. But they hadn't. They'd stood by their assumptions, doubled down on their mistake, reinforced the illusion of control. Now they were about to watch that control dissolve, not from resistance, but from visibility. The plane was sealed, the passengers seated, the door still closed, and justice had quietly boarded alongside them. The silence inside the aircraft wasn't ordinary. It wasn't the hush before takeoff, or the gentle quiet of a luxury cabin. It was the kind that settles after something irreversible happens, a silence full of awareness, but no words. David Rivers sat with his hands folded, eyes steady. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but the situation was moving around him, faster than the crew realized. Carla Dawson paced through her remaining pre-flight checks, posture exact, but expression fractured. She was still performing for the passengers, the smiles, the tone, the politeness, but her mind was elsewhere. The moment she deleted that seat from the manifest, she had crossed a line. She just didn't know how far it would travel. Zach Morgan was quieter now. His casual banter had dried up, replaced by short nods and unnecessary tasks. He kept to the galley, checking water bottles, rechecking tray setups. He'd stopped making eye contact. His role had shifted. No longer confident, now cornered. Captain Wallace remained isolated in the cockpit. He hadn't returned to clarify his orders. He hadn't reviewed the boarding manifest. His involvement had been brief and decisive, but it was built on a false premise, and now that truth was crawling back through the cracks of command. In Seat 2C, Olivia Bennett scrolled through her notifications. Her video had reached over 500,000 views. Not just reposts, comments. News agencies were tagging her. James Cole had already spoken to 2 journalists via DM. The headlines were writing themselves. In the back, Lena Torres stood motionless. Her phone continued recording. No one had told her to stop. No one dared. Her expression hadn't changed, but everything inside her had. This wasn't just her first solo international flight. It was her first confrontation with institutional failure. At Altura headquarters, Nina Brooks didn't bother with speculation. She assembled a timeline, loaded the files, and dialed into the emergency board call with one mission: make them understand before the world did. Her presentation didn't begin with legal language or protocol breaches. It began with footage, the silent deletion, the unchallenged smirk, the failure to verify, the seat erased, and David, seated quietly, as if testing the airline he helped build to see what it did when no one told it he was watching. This wasn't about corporate responsibility anymore. This was personal. The man in 1A hadn't been humiliated. He had been underestimated. And now the consequences weren't coming from him. They were coming for everyone who thought he wouldn't respond. Some moments don't announce themselves. They unfold slowly, with weight that builds in silence, until the shift is complete, and nothing can return to how it was. That was the atmosphere inside Flight 894. David Rivers hadn't moved from Seat 1A. No one had asked him to again. Not since the truth had reached the surface. Not since silence had turned into record, and record had turned into proof. The cabin crew functioned like clockwork, but without rhythm. Carla Dawson stood behind the curtain, headset on, but eyes unfocused. She hadn't spoken to passengers in over 20 minutes. She was no longer facilitating service. She was waiting for a call, for a consequence, for confirmation that her authority had finally outpaced its limits. Zach Morgan kept to the aisles, head down. Each tray he adjusted was an act of distraction. His earlier confidence now felt like a past life. He wasn't trying to fix the situation. He was trying not to be the center of it. But that wasn't his choice anymore. In the cockpit, Captain Wallace's tone over intercom was clipped, cautious. "We've received notice of an extended hold due to gate-level operational review." He offered no apology, no estimate, just the kind of language designed to hide urgency behind professionalism. But the urgency was real, just not in the air. At Altura Air headquarters, the response had shifted from damage control to structural analysis. Nina Brooks's team had moved quickly, not to spin the narrative, but to prepare leadership for what was already public. The video timeline was airtight. The audio was clear. The deletion logs were matched. Passenger identities verified. Every attempt to question the incident was buried under metadata. And David? Still silent, still seated. His presence now felt like a spotlight, not on himself but on the mechanisms around him. The people who'd assumed, the systems that complied, the silence that enabled. No resistance, no statements, just undeniable presence. Across news sites, headlines emerged. CEO erased in first class. Altura under fire after viral discrimination clip. Financial analysts were discussing the PR impact on the airline's valuation. Travel blogs turned technical breakdowns into human commentary. And somewhere between silence and consequence, the realization began to settle in for the crew on board. This wasn't just a delay. It was a turning point, and they were part of the reason it happened. The plane touched down in New York under clouded skies. No fanfare, no further incident. Just a quiet descent into the city where Altura Air's corporate name still held weight, though now, that weight had shifted. David Rivers disembarked like everyone else. He didn't look back. No one approached him. Not the crew, not the captain, not a single representative of the airline he helped create. The moment didn't require ceremony. It had already delivered its message, and it had been heard. Inside Altura headquarters, lights stayed on late. Crisis teams worked through the night. HR conducted closed-door interviews. Legal drafted memorandums. Flight operations froze future assignments for multiple crew members. A new protocol was quietly proposed before morning, one that would rewrite how authority was exercised on board. But it came too late to fix what had already been seen. Passengers who'd once praised Altura for its polished service now cited it as a case study in failure. Not mechanical, but moral. A precision-built airline caught malfunctioning in the one area it couldn't afford. Judgment. David's name was never mentioned in the press release. The language was sterile. An isolated incident. Under internal review. Altura remains committed to inclusion. But the footage made sure no one believed those words without context. In employee forums, quiet threads emerged. I saw the clip. Training missed this. We're exposed. Behind each post was the same realization. If this could happen to someone like him, it could happen to anyone. And had many times, just without cameras to catch it. The flight would be remembered, not for the route, not for the delay, but for how it revealed the subtle speed at which power, when left unchecked, can try to erase someone it doesn't recognize, and how, when caught, that same power scrambles to hide the evidence. But not this time. Lena Torres' recording was archived into Altura's training protocol. Olivia Bennett's footage became part of an industry compliance case. James Cole's edit was cited in 2 university courses on digital accountability. And David? He returned home. Not with victory, not with vengeance, just with proof. Sometimes silence is louder than protest. Sometimes the most effective disruption is documentation, and sometimes the only thing stronger than authority is truth, recorded in real time. David Rivers didn't leave that flight with anger in his chest. He left with clarity, not the kind that comes from outrage, but from watching a process unfold exactly as it was wired to, biased, dismissive, unchallenged. It wasn't just one moment. It was a cascade, a look, a gesture, a refusal to verify, a deletion without consequence. What shook him wasn't that it happened to him. It was how easily it could have happened to anyone else, and how often it probably had. That was the real damage, not to his seat or his name, but to the trust that Altura had claimed to stand for. What Carla and Zach did wasn't personal, it was systemic. They reacted not as individuals, but as parts of a pattern David had hoped to eliminate when he helped build the airline. But patterns don't dissolve on intention alone. They require friction. And this flight, this moment became that friction. Not because he shouted, not because he retaliated, but because he didn't need to. The story unfolded exactly as it should have, for the world to see, without editing, without spin. And that was enough. Back at corporate, there were meetings and memos and sudden changes. But David didn't attend them. He didn't need to lead the cleanup. That wasn't the point. The point was never to burn the house down. It was to expose the leaks, to make sure the next passenger, the one who doesn't carry a last name recognized by boardrooms, is treated with dignity on arrival, not after the world watches. And that would be the lasting impact, not the footage, not the headlines, but the recalibration, the policies that would now be written not in corporate language, but in reaction to failure. His silence had become louder than any corporate promise. And the crew, the passengers, the executives, they all knew it. The test was never about confrontation. It was about truth. And truth, once seen, doesn't vanish. It becomes part of the structure. David didn't return to fix what happened. He walked away, knowing the system would never be allowed to operate the same again. That was justice. And that was always enough. This wasn't a story about confrontation. It was about presence. David Rivers showed what it means to hold ground without raising a hand or a voice, and how systems sometimes only change when someone chooses to simply stay. If this story made you pause, subscribe to the channel. This is Fictional Story. Like the video if it resonated, and let us know in the comments. How would you have responded in that seat, in that moment?
Stay.